The claiming right was where you went when no one wanted you. And as Senna stood among the forgotten wolves who had been passed over, dismissed, and discarded, she did something none of them expected. She refused to be claimed. A heavy cloak hung over her shoulders, concealing the mark she could never let anyone see. The mark of ultimate shame. The proof that even fate itself had rejected her. Around her, the other women preened and posed, desperate for any alpha's attention. But Senna kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the stone floor. She wasn't here to be chosen. She was here because her stepmother had demanded it, because the alternative was being sold as a servant to the lowest bidder. So when the alphas approached, she turned away. When they reached for her, she stepped back. When they demanded she present herself, she simply said, "No." The crowd whispered, "What kind of wolf refuses to be claimed? What could be so broken about her that she'd rather face exile than let an alpha look upon her?" They weren't wrong to wonder. Then the doors exploded open, and the Lycan king walked in. Sorin of Valdris, the most powerful alpha in 5 kingdoms, the king who had never taken a mate, never marked a woman, never shown interest in anyone. He walked past noblewomen and daughters of lords without a glance. He passed the most beautiful wolves in the realm as if they were invisible. And he stopped directly in front of Senna. "This one," he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade through silk. "I claim her." The hall erupted in chaos, but Senna didn't understand. Not until he made his terms clear. He would marry her, protect her, give her everything she needed. He would even swear never to demand she reveal what she was hiding. But only under one condition. He would never bond with her, never mark her, never love her. Neither of them understood how impossible that vow would become. The great hall of Valdris had been transformed for the claiming right. Torches lined the ancient stone walls, casting flickering shadows across the faces of the gathered crowd. The scent of desperation hung thick in the air, mingling with wood smoke and the bitter undertone of fear. Senna stood at the far end of the platform where the unclaimed wolves had been arranged, not in the center where the pretty ones positioned themselves, not near the front where the desperate ones pushed and preened. She stood in the shadows at the very edge, half hidden behind a stone pillar, as if hoping the darkness might swallow her entirely. The other women whispered among themselves, adjusting their gowns, pinching color into their cheeks. One sobbed quietly, her tears cutting tracks through powder that couldn't quite hide the lines around her eyes. Another stood rigid with her chin raised, a jagged scar running down her neck, defiance burning in her gaze despite everything. But it was Senna who drew the most whispers. Not because she was beautiful, not because she was hideous, but because no one could tell. She wore a heavy traveling cloak despite the warmth of the hall, the hood pulled forward just enough to shadow her features. Her hands remained hidden in the folds of the fabric. Only her boots were visible beneath the hem, worn leather that spoke of poverty and hard roads. "What's wrong with that one?" a merchant muttered to his companion, not bothering to lower his voice. "Must be deformed," the companion replied. "Or cursed. Why else would she hide?" Senna heard every word. She'd spent 23 years hearing words exactly like them. Runt. Weakling. Cursed. Broken. The words had stopped hurting years ago. Now they simply confirmed what she already knew. Near the edge of the platform, watching from the gathered crowd, stood her father. Severin hadn't acknowledged her, hadn't even looked in her direction. He stood with his wife, Senna's stepmother, and their daughter Odessa, a vision of golden curls and porcelain skin who kept glancing toward the platform with barely concealed satisfaction. This was their final revenge. Senna's stepmother had made that clear enough. "You'll be claimed by some minor alpha," she'd hissed that morning. "Some old widower looking for a servant to warm his bed, or you'll be passed over entirely, and we'll finally be rid of you." Either outcome suited them. Either outcome ended with Senna gone from their lives forever. The auctioneer droned on, calling forward wolves one by one, listing their bloodlines and qualities with the enthusiasm of a man selling lame horses at market. One by one, alphas claimed them. An elderly lord chose the crying woman. A scarred warrior chose the defiant one with the scar. The platform emptied slowly, steadily, until only a handful remained. Until only Senna remained. The last, the auctioneer announced, gesturing vaguely in her direction. Unknown bloodline, unknown qualities. She has refused to present herself for inspection. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Refused? An alpha stepped forward then. Young, handsome, with the arrogant bearing of minor nobility. He approached Senna with a smirk already forming on his lips. "Well then," he drawled, "let's have a look at what you're hiding, little wolf." Senna lifted her head just enough to meet his eyes. "No," she said quietly. The alpha blinked, then laughed, certain he'd misheard. "No? You don't get to say no, Runt. Present yourself." Senna felt every eye in the hall turn toward her, felt the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, and their disdain. And she thought of all the years she'd spent trying to be enough, trying to prove she was worthy of acceptance. Those years were over. I said no. Her voice came stronger now. I don't choose you. I don't choose any of you. I would rather be exiled than let one more alpha look at me like I'm livestock to be purchased. Silence crashed through the hall. The alpha's face twisted with fury. He reached for her, ready to tear the cloak from her shoulders himself. And then the doors burst open. Every head turned. Every conversation died. Even the torches seemed to dim as a presence rolled into the hall, a power so absolute that it made the air itself feel heavier. The Lycan king had arrived. Sorin of Valdris walked into the hall as if he owned not just this castle, but every stone, every soul, every breath within its walls. Because he did. He was tall, impossibly tall, with hair as black as a moonless night that fell past his shoulders in a cascade of dark silk. His features were carved from shadow and stone, beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful, sharp and dangerous and utterly without mercy. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale blue so light they seemed almost silver in the torchlight. And those eyes held nothing, no warmth, no curiosity, no humanity at all. The alpha who had been reaching for Senna stumbled backward, nearly falling in his haste to bow. All around the hall, wolves dropped to their knees. All except Senna, who stood frozen, staring at the king who had materialized from her nightmares. "Continue," Sorin said. The auctioneer stammered something incomprehensible. "I said continue." The king began walking. Not toward the throne, not toward the gathered nobles, toward the platform, toward her. His footsteps echoed through the silence like a death knell. He passed Odessa without a glance, though she had positioned herself perfectly in his path, her golden beauty displayed like a prize to be won. He passed daughters of lords and ladies, noble women who had traveled weeks for a chance to catch his eye. He stopped directly in front of Senna. For a long moment he simply looked at her. At the cloak that hid her face, at the shadows that concealed her shame. His expression revealed nothing. And then, in a voice that carried to every corner of the hall, cold and final and absolutely certain, he spoke. "This one. I claim her." The hall erupted. Senna couldn't breathe. And somewhere in the crowd, her stepmother's face twisted with an emotion that looked very much like terror. The carriage moved through the darkness like a ship through storm waters, swaying gently as it climbed the winding road toward the palace. Senna sat rigid against the velvet cushions, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Through the small window, she could see the castle rising against the night sky. Obsidian towers piercing the stars. Walls that had stood for 1,000 years, dark and imposing and utterly unlike anything she had ever known. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, something else had taken root. Relief. In that hall, surrounded by wolves who had spent her entire life making her feel worthless, the most powerful alpha in existence had looked at her and spoken words no one had ever spoken before. I claim her. Not because she was beautiful. He hadn't even seen her face. Not because of her bloodline. He didn't know her name. He had chosen her for reasons she couldn't fathom, and somehow, impossibly, that mystery felt safer than any certainty she had ever known. The carriage stopped. A guard opened the door, offering his hand with more respect than anyone had ever shown her. Senna took it with trembling fingers, stepping down onto smooth stone that gleamed in the torchlight. The palace loomed above her, massive and ancient and somehow alive, as if the stone itself was watching her approach. "This way, my lady," the guard said. My lady. The words sounded foreign, wrong. She was no lady. She was the Runt, the cursed one, the wolf who had been rejected by her own fated mate. But she followed anyway, through corridors that seemed to stretch into eternity, past tapestries depicting battles and coronations and wolves running beneath silver moons. Servants bowed as she passed, their faces curious but not cruel. No one sneered. No one whispered insults they thought she couldn't hear. When had anyone last looked at her with simple curiosity instead of disgust? They stopped before a heavy wooden door bound in iron. "The king will see you now, my lady." Senna's throat went dry. But she had spent her whole life being afraid, and fear had never saved her from anything. So she stepped through the door and into whatever awaited her on the other side. The room was a study. Bookshelves lined every wall, climbing toward a ceiling lost in shadow. A fire burned low in an enormous hearth, casting dancing light across a desk covered in maps and documents. The air smelled of old paper and pine and something else, something cold and sharp, like the first breath of winter. And standing by the window, backlit by the pale glow of distant stars, was the Lycan king himself. He turned at her entrance, and Senna felt the cold radiating from him like a physical force, not figuratively, actually, physically cold, as if winter lived inside him and was slowly spreading outward. She dropped into a curtsy, her cloak shifting around her. "Your Majesty." "Rise." His voice was exactly as she remembered, controlled, distant, empty of any warmth whatsoever. She straightened, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. Through the shadows of her hood she studied him, the sharp lines of his jaw, the winter-pale eyes that passed over her without interest. He looked at her the way one might look at a piece of furniture, something present, something functional. Nothing more. Strangely, it was comforting. "Your Majesty," Senna began, her voice barely steady, "I have to warn you. Before you decide anything else, you should know what I am, what I'm hiding. If you'd just let me explain." "No." The words stopped her cold. "Your Majesty?" Soren turned fully toward her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in those frozen eyes. Not curiosity, not interest. Something closer to exhaustion. "You hide yourself. I assume you have reasons. I don't need to know them. I don't want to know them. Whatever shame you carry, whatever secret, it doesn't concern me." Senna stared at him. "But you'll be marrying me. Shouldn't you at least know?" "I'll be marrying a stranger," he cut in. "That was always the intention. I chose you precisely because you were hiding, because you clearly want to remain unseen." He paused, studying her shadowed form. "If you wish to keep your secrets, then keep them. I will never demand you reveal yourself. I will never look upon whatever you conceal." Her mind reeled. This couldn't be real. This had to be some elaborate cruelty, some trap she couldn't yet see. "Why?" The word escaped her before she could stop it. Why choose me? You could have anyone. Why pick the one wolf no one wanted? For a long moment, Soren didn't answer. The fire crackled in the silence. Because I wanted a wife who would ask nothing of me, he said finally, and who would expect nothing in return. The marriage will be a contract. Nothing more. You will have my protection, my name, my wealth. You will live in comfort. You will want for nothing. And in return, you will give me heirs. You will appear at official functions when required. Beyond that, we will not share a life. We will not share a room. We will not dine together or spend time together. His eyes met hers through the shadows. And I will never bond with you. Never mark you. Never love you. Is that understood? The words should have hurt, should have reminded her of every rejection she had ever suffered. But all Senna felt was a strange, desperate hope. No expectations, no demands. No one looking at her with disappointment when she failed to be enough. Just cold indifference, just safety. I understand, Your Majesty, she said quietly, and I accept your terms. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, as if he had expected her to weep, or protest, or demand something more. Very well. He moved toward the door, clearly considering the conversation finished. The wedding will take place in 3 days. Servants will attend you. If you wish them to be blind so none may look upon you, it will be arranged. Senna's breath caught. You would do that? He paused at the door, not quite looking back. You accepted my terms without complaint. The least I can do is honor yours. Then he was gone. Senna stood alone in the fire-lit study, trembling. She should refuse this. Should run back to her father's house, back to the familiar misery she understood. But then she remembered her stepmother's hatred, her father's cold indifference. The mark on her shoulder that had destroyed everything, that had branded her as rejected by fate itself. The Lycan king looked at her with nothing. No hatred, no disgust. Not even curiosity. Just cold, careful distance. And somehow, that nothing felt like mercy. Cold over cruelty, she thought, touching the cloak at her throat. I'll choose cold over cruelty every single time. The council chamber was vast and ancient, its stone walls lined with banners depicting the royal lineage of Valdris. Morning light streamed through tall windows, cold and pale, illuminating a long table where the most powerful figures in the kingdom had gathered to witness an impossibility. The Lycan king was taking a mate. Senna walked between 2 guards, her cloak still firmly in place, her face still hidden in shadow. She could feel the weight of every stare, hear the whispered speculation that followed her like a shadow. Is that her? Why won't she show her face? The king could have anyone. Why choose damaged goods? Perhaps she's bewitched him. Perhaps it's some kind of dark magic. She ignored them all. She had learned long ago that other people's words only had power if you let them. The guards stopped, and Senna found herself at the threshold of the council chamber. Inside, she could see them gathered around the table. Advisors in formal robes, lords with calculating eyes. And at the far end, barely looking at her, sat someone who made her blood run cold. Her father. Severin had aged in the years since he'd handed her off to her stepmother. More gray in his hair, more lines around his mouth. But those cold, dismissive eyes were exactly the same. And beside him, watching with barely concealed fury, stood Odessa. Lady Senna, a guard announced. She stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. The Lycan king sat at the head of the table, dressed in black as always, his pale eyes tracking her approach. He looked as cold and remote as the mountains beyond the palace, and somehow that steadiness calmed her racing heart. Sit, Soren gestured to the empty chair beside him. Senna sat. The whispers intensified. One of the advisors cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the marriage contract has been prepared according to your specifications. If you'd like to review the terms. The terms are straightforward. Soren picked up a document, scanned it briefly, then set it down. His gaze moved to Senna, to the shadow where her face should be. First and most importantly, I will never look upon you. Neither I nor anyone in my household, my court, or my kingdom will be permitted to demand you reveal yourself. Senna's breath caught. He was protecting her. In front of everyone. Is this agreeable to you? He asked. Before she could answer, her father surged forward. Your Majesty, I must object. Severin's voice carried the practiced smoothness of a politician, but beneath it, something desperate lurked. You don't understand what you're agreeing to. This girl, my daughter, she's not fit to be anyone's wife, let alone a queen. If you knew what she was hiding. I wasn't speaking to you. The words landed like a blade. Soren hadn't raised his voice, hadn't changed his expression. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees, and Severin went pale. I was speaking, Soren continued coldly, to my future queen. The silence that followed was absolute. Senna stared at the king, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. My future queen. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever silenced her father's cruelty with 3 simple words. Is this agreeable to you? Soren repeated, as if her father hadn't spoken at all. Yes, Your Majesty. Her voice came out steady despite everything. More than agreeable. Thank you. The advisor shifted uncomfortably. Soren tilted his head slightly, studying her. Thank me? For what? For your kindness, Senna said simply. The word seemed to confuse him. His brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, as if kindness were a foreign concept he couldn't quite translate. The remaining terms, Soren said, returning his attention to the contract. You will provide heirs to continue the royal line. Beyond that duty, we will not share a life. We will not share chambers. You will appear at royal functions perhaps 4 times per year. That is the extent of our interaction. He paused, then added with the same measured precision. This is a contractual arrangement only. You will live in comfort. You will want for nothing. But I will give you nothing beyond what the contract requires. Not my time, not my attention, not my heart. Am I clear? The advisors watched her, waiting for tears. For protest. For some sign of feminine weakness they could exploit. Severin watched with barely concealed hope, certain she would refuse now, certain this mad dream would collapse. Even Soren seemed braced for her reaction, his jaw tight, his shoulders tense. But Senna had spent her entire life learning to survive without love, without affection, without anyone's heart. What this cold king offered was more than she had ever received from her own family. I accept your terms, Your Majesty, she said clearly. They are more than generous. The advisors gaped, her father's face contorted with rage, and Soren, the Lycan king, looked at her with something that might have been confusion, might have been curiosity, might have been the first crack in that wall of ice he had built around himself. Generous, he repeated slowly. To be married to someone who wants nothing to do with you, who will never care for you. I've known cruelty, Your Majesty. Senna met his gaze through the shadows of her hood. What you offer is not cruelty. It is safety. It is protection. It is the freedom to exist without being looked at like something broken. She paused. That is generous, whether you meant it to be or not. For a long moment no one breathed. Then Soren pushed the contract across the table. Sign here. Senna signed, her handwriting small but steady. Her father signed as witness, his hand shaking with suppressed fury. The advisors signed, exchanging glances loaded with questions no one dared ask aloud. And then it was done. In 3 days, she would be Queen of Valdris, wife to the most powerful and most mysterious king in the realm, bound to a man who had promised her everything except the one thing that had always been denied her: love. Somehow, that felt right. The corridors were crowded as Senna left the council chamber. Courtiers and servants stopped to stare, their whispers chasing her like hungry wolves. "Did you see?" She didn't even flinch. What kind of woman accepts those terms without tears? There must be something very wrong with her indeed. She kept her head down, her pace steady. Just a few more minutes. Just a few more steps until she reached the safety of her chambers. But before she could reach the staircase, someone stepped into her path. Odessa. Her stepsister was dressed in silk the color of spring leaves, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls, her beautiful face twisted with an ugly emotion she didn't bother to hide. "You think you've won?" Odessa hissed. "You think hiding behind that cloak will protect you forever?" "I don't think I've won anything," Senna said quietly. "I'm simply surviving. Same as always." "He'll demand to see you eventually." Odessa stepped closer, her voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "He's the Lycan king, Senna, the most powerful alpha alive. And you really believe he'll honor some foolish promise? That he'll never want to know what his own wife looks like?" Senna said nothing. "And when he does look," Odessa continued, her smile turning cruel, "when he sees that mark on your shoulder, when he learns that you're a wolf so pathetic that your own fated mate rejected you in front of everyone, he won't just cast you aside, he'll destroy you." The words cut deeper than Senna wanted to admit. Because Odessa wasn't wrong. The mark on her shoulder, the mate mark that had appeared when she was 16 and had led to the most humiliating moment of her life. That mark was her greatest shame. The proof that even fate itself had made a mistake when it came to her. "He promised," Senna whispered. "He said he would never look." Odessa laughed, the sound sharp and brittle. "And you believed him? You stupid, naive little runt. Men like him don't keep promises. They take what they want. And when he takes one look at what you really are..." She leaned in, her breath hot against Senna's ear. "He'll wish he'd chosen me instead." Then she turned and swept away, leaving Senna standing alone in the corridor, her heart pounding, her hands trembling beneath her cloak. 3 days until the wedding. 3 days until she became queen. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice whispered what she already knew. Odessa was right. The truth always came out eventually. And when Soren learned what Senna really was, when he discovered the shame she carried on her very skin, this fragile sanctuary would crumble to dust. She just had to hope she survived the fall. The morning of her wedding dawned gray and cold, as if the sky itself had dressed to match the groom. Senna stood before a mirror she couldn't use, surrounded by the blind servants Soren had provided. They moved with practiced grace, their hands gentle as they prepared her for a ceremony that would change everything. They had bathed her in water scented with night-blooming jasmine. They had brushed her dark hair until it gleamed, arranging it in elaborate braids that no one would see beneath her veil. They had dressed her in silk the color of moonlight, a gown that whispered against her skin with every breath, and through it all, not one of them had asked to see her face. Not one had questioned why their future queen refused to be looked upon. It was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for her. "My lady," the eldest servant said softly, "the carriage has arrived." Senna took a breath, then another. Her hands were steady as she pulled her cloak around her shoulders, as she settled the heavy veil over her features. Today she would become a queen. Today she would bind herself to a man who had promised her nothing but cold indifference. Somehow, that felt like hope. The cathedral was ancient, older than the palace, older than the kingdom itself. Its spires clawed at the gray sky like fingers reaching for something they could never touch, and its doors stood open like the mouth of some great beast waiting to swallow her whole. The crowd that had gathered was enormous. Nobles and commoners alike had come to witness the impossible. The Lycan king, the cold ruler who had rejected every princess and noblewoman in 5 kingdoms, was finally taking a mate. And not just any mate, a mystery, a shadow, a woman no one had ever seen. Senna stepped from the carriage and the crowd's murmur swelled into a roar. There she is! Why won't she show her face? The king must be under some spell. This is madness. We'll see her after the ceremony. She'll have to reveal herself then. Senna walked toward the cathedral entrance alone. No father to escort her, no family to wish her well. Just the weight of 1,000 stairs and the whisper of silk against stone. The moment she crossed the threshold, the noise faded to a muffled hum. Inside, the cathedral stretched toward heaven, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. Candles flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing light across the faces of the assembled nobles. Every single one of them turned to stare. And at the end of the aisle, standing before the ancient altar, was Soren. He wore black. Of course he did, but this black was different, formal and severe, emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders and the sharp angles of his face. He looked like something carved from obsidian and winter ice, beautiful and terrible and utterly unreachable. His pale eyes found her immediately. Senna began to walk. Each step felt like a mile. The whispers followed her like hungry shadows, speculation and judgment and cruel curiosity. Perhaps she's hideously scarred. Perhaps she's not even a wolf at all. The king has lost his mind. She ignored them. She had learned long ago that whispers only had power if you stopped to listen. When she finally reached the altar, Soren extended his hand. Senna took it and gasped. His skin was ice, not cold in the way of winter wind or mountain streams. Actually, genuinely ice, as if his blood had frozen in his veins and forgotten how to warm. Soren's eyes flickered, something passing through them too quickly to name. Awareness, perhaps, or warning. But he said nothing, and neither did she. The priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the vast space. Senna barely heard the words. She was too aware of the frozen hand holding hers, too aware of the cold radiating from the man beside her like mist rising from a frozen lake. What was wrong with him? What could make a Lycan, a creature of heat and primal fire, feel like winter itself? Do you, Soren of Valdris, Lycan king, take this woman as your mate? The priest intoned. I do. His voice betrayed nothing. No hesitation, no regret, no warmth. And do you, Senna, take this man as your mate? I do. The priest smiled. Then speak your claiming vows and seal your bond. This was it. The moment when they would claim each other with words, since the physical claiming, the biting, the marking, would require Senna to reveal skin she couldn't reveal. Soren turned to face her fully. His ice-pale eyes found the shadow where her face should be. I claim you as mine, he said, his voice carrying through the cathedral. My wife, my queen, my mate. I vow to protect you, to provide for you, to honor the promises I have made. Something stirred inside Senna, her wolf, restless and uncertain, reaching toward him despite everything. I claim you as mine, she echoed. My husband, my king, my mate. I vow to stand beside you, to honor our agreement, to ask nothing of you that you have not offered freely. The priest beamed. Then by the ancient laws of our kind I pronounce you mated. Your Majesty, you may reveal your queen to the realm. The cathedral went silent. This was the moment everyone had waited for. The moment the mysterious bride would finally be unveiled. The moment the crowd would see what the Lycan king had chosen. Senna's heart hammered against her ribs. Soren studied her veiled face for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached not for her veil, but for her hand. He lifted it to his lips. The kiss was gentle, soft, his mouth cold as frost against her gloved knuckles. But it was also a statement, a declaration louder than any words. He would not unveil her. He would not demand what she wasn't willing to give. He would keep his promise. Even here, even now, even when the entire kingdom watched and waited. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. He didn't look at her. What kind of marriage is this? Something is very wrong here. But Senna heard none of it. She was staring at Soren, at this strange, cold, impossible man who had just proven something no one in her life had ever proven before. His word meant something. "Thank you," she whispered. Soren's eyes met hers through the veil, and for just a moment she thought she saw something crack in that wall of ice. Then it was gone, and he was leading her back down the aisle, his frozen hand clasped around hers, and Senna realized with dawning wonder that she had just married the one person in the world who might actually keep his promises. Now she just had to survive the wedding night. The queen's chambers were larger than any room Senna had ever occupied. Silk curtains framed windows that overlooked the moonlit gardens. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the air with warmth and the scent of pine. The bed was enormous, draped in fabrics so soft they seemed woven from clouds, and Senna sat on its edge, trying to remember how to breathe. The blind servants had prepared her. They had bathed her in rose-scented water, brushed her hair until it fell in dark waves down her back, and dressed her in a nightgown so thin it felt like wearing moonlight. Then they had left her alone to wait for her husband. Her husband, who would come to her tonight to fulfill their contract. Her husband, who was made of ice and silence and promises he actually kept. 3 soft knocks echoed through the room. Senna's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Come in." The door opened and Soren stepped inside. He had changed from his wedding clothes. Gone was the formal black jacket, the severe lines of royal attire. He wore only a simple shirt, unlaced at the throat, revealing the strong column of his neck. His dark hair was loose, falling past his shoulders, and in the firelight he looked almost human, almost warm, almost. He closed the door behind him with a soft click. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. The moonlight shifted. And Senna felt the weight of everything they were about to do pressing down on her like a physical force. "I brought something," Soren said quietly. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a strip of black silk. "A blindfold," he explained. "So that even accidentally, even in darkness, I cannot see what you wish to remain hidden." Senna stared at the silk in his hand, at the thoughtfulness of the gesture, at this cold, remote king who had thought of her comfort when no one else ever had. "You would wear that?" she whispered. "For me? I made you a promise." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing something as mundane as the weather. "I intend to keep it." Something cracked inside her, something that had been frozen for years, protecting her from hope, protecting her from wanting things she could never have. "All right, say," she said softly. "Turn around." Soren turned. Senna rose from the bed on trembling legs and approached him. She had to rise on her toes to reach, had to step close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from his skin. Up close, she could see things the distance had hidden. The individual strands of his dark hair catching the firelight, a small scar at the corner of his jaw, the way his shoulders tensed slightly as her fingers brushed against his skin. She tied the blindfold carefully, her hands shaking. "Is it secure?" she asked. "Yes." She moved to extinguish the candles, plunging the room into darkness relieved only by the dying fire. Complete silence fell. Senna could hear his breathing, steady, controlled. But beneath that control, something else. A subtle shift in his scent, the winter sharpness giving way to something warmer, something almost human. "I can smell your fear," Soren said quietly. Of course he could. He was the Lycan king. He could probably smell her heartbeat, her nervousness, every emotion she was trying so desperately to hide. "I've never," she started, then stopped. "Never what?" "Never been touched," she admitted. "Not like this. Not by anyone who wasn't trying to hurt me." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with something she couldn't name. Then Soren moved. His hands rose slowly in the darkness, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his palms settled on her shoulders with impossible gentleness. His touch was cold, ice against her flushed skin. But there was care in it, a tenderness she hadn't expected, hadn't dared to hope for. For a long moment he simply held her like that. His thumbs traced slow circles against her collarbones, soothing, steadying. "Tell me if you want me to stop," he murmured. "At any moment. For any reason. Tell me, and I will." Senna's throat tightened. When had anyone ever offered her that? When had anyone ever given her a choice? "I don't want you to stop," she whispered. His fingers slid beneath the thin straps of her nightgown. He paused, a question in the stillness. She made a soft sound of assent. The silk whispered down her body like water. Senna shivered, but not from cold. From anticipation. From the strange, terrifying newness of being touched by someone who wasn't trying to hurt her. She reached for him with trembling hands, finding the edge of his shirt. Her fingers fumbled with the fabric, pushing it from his shoulders, revealing skin that felt like winter marble beneath her palms. He was beautiful. She knew that without seeing him. She could feel it in the sculpted planes of his chest, the ridges of muscle along his stomach, the way his body tensed and relaxed under her exploration. When her hand settled over his heart, she felt it beating. Fast. Faster than his controlled demeanor suggested. "You're so cold," she breathed. "I know." Something in his voice shifted, something that sounded almost like pain. "Does it bother you?" "No." And it was true. His coldness wasn't cruel. It was simply part of him, like his pale eyes, like his dark hair, like the wall of ice he had built around his heart. "You're warm," he said, and there was wonder in his voice. So warm. His mouth found hers in the darkness. The kiss was gentle at first, exploratory. His lips were cool but soft, moving against hers with a patience that stole her breath. She had never been kissed before, and the sensation overwhelmed her completely, sweet and strange and perfect. Then the kiss deepened, and Senna forgot everything except his hands in her hair, his body pressing against hers, the way the cold of him and the warmth of her created something entirely new. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed, laying her down with such care that she felt precious, breakable, worth protecting. When he finally joined their bodies, there was pain, sharp and sudden. But he stilled immediately, his breath ragged against her neck. "Breathe," he murmured. "Just breathe. We'll go slowly." And they did. Slow and careful and unexpectedly tender. The cold of his skin and the heat of hers, the darkness that hid everything, the way his hands learned her body like a blind man learning Braille. By the end, Senna understood something she had never expected to learn. Intimacy wasn't just physical, it was trust. It was vulnerability. It was letting someone close enough to hurt you and believing they wouldn't. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, both trembling. Soren's arm was wrapped around her waist, his cold body pressed against her back. She could feel his heartbeat against her spine, still fast, still racing. "I should go," he murmured. The words shouldn't have hurt. This was their arrangement. Separate lives. Separate rooms. Nothing but contract and duty. But they did hurt. More than she wanted to admit. Yes, she said quietly. You should? He didn't move. Minutes passed. The fire crackled lower. And still he held her, his breath evening out, his body gradually relaxing against hers. Just before sleep claimed her, Senna felt him press a kiss to her shoulder, cold lips against warm skin, gentle, almost reverent. Thank you, he whispered, for tonight. And then, finally, reluctantly, he slipped away into the darkness. Senna lay alone in the enormous bed, touching the place where his lips had been, wondering why a kiss that cold had made her feel so impossibly warm. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of wonder and confusion. Senna had expected Soren to keep his distance after that first night. He had been clear about their arrangement, contractual, separate, nothing more than necessary. But the next evening, as the sun set beyond the palace windows, a knock sounded at her chamber door. She opened it to find the Lycan king standing in the corridor, his expression unreadable, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your Majesty," she said, surprised. "Is something wrong?" "No." He seemed to struggle with something, his jaw tight. "I simply came to inquire after your health." He came to check on her. The realization bloomed in her chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I'm well, Your Majesty," she said softly. "Thank you for asking." An awkward silence stretched between them. Soren stood rigid in the doorway, clearly wanting to say something more but not knowing how. "Would you like to come in?" Senna heard herself ask. Something flickered in his pale eyes. Relief, perhaps, or something closer to hunger. "If you're not too tired." She stepped aside, and the Lycan king walked into her chambers as if entering enemy territory, cautious and alert, and trying very hard to pretend he wasn't. That night, they came together again. And the night after. And the night after that. Each time, Soren arrived at her door as the sun set. Each time, he wore the blindfold without complaint. Each time, he touched her with the same careful tenderness, as if she were something precious and fragile and infinitely worth protecting. And each time, when they lay tangled together afterward, he stayed a little longer before slipping away. But Senna wanted more, not more of his body, not more of the physical pleasure that still surprised her with its intensity. She wanted him to stay, to sleep beside her, to be there when she woke in the morning. She went to the only person who might understand. Lady Meridia was the king's elderly aunt, a sharp-tongued woman who had lived in the palace for decades. She received Senna in her private chambers with raised eyebrows and a knowing smile. "So," Meridia said, pouring tea with gnarled hands, "the mystery queen has come seeking advice about her husband. Is it that obvious?" "Dear child, the entire palace knows Soren visits your chambers every night. The servants talk. They always do." Senna felt her cheeks warm beneath her veil. I want him to stay. Not just for the—" She trailed off, embarrassed. "For the betting?" Meridia supplied cheerfully. "You want him to actually sleep with you, in the non-carnal sense." "Yes." The old woman studied her for a long moment. "My nephew has never stayed the night with any woman. Not his mistresses, few as they were. Not anyone. He arrives, he departs, and he maintains his distance." She paused. "But he's never visited the same woman twice either. The fact that he keeps coming back to you speaks volumes." "What do I do?" Meridia's smile turned wicked. "Exhaust him, dear. Make him so thoroughly spent that leaving becomes impossible." So Senna tried. That night, when Soren came to her chambers, she was ready. She had thought about Meridia's words, had prepared herself to be bold in ways that still made her blush. She kissed him first this time. She touched him with growing confidence, learning what made his breath catch, what made his hands grip tighter. She coaxed him to completion once, then again, until even the Lycan King's legendary stamina began to waver. By the time dawn approached, Soren collapsed beside her, his arm coming around her waist automatically, pulling her back against his chest. Within moments, his breathing evened out. He was asleep. Senna lay perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. He was so cold against her back, like pressing against a block of ice, but she didn't care. He was here. He had stayed. In the morning, she woke to find his fingers intertwined with hers. "You stayed." "Ah," she whispered. "I did." His voice was rough with sleep, confused. "I didn't mean to." "Do you regret it?" A long pause. His thumb stroked across her knuckles, a gesture so small and yet so impossibly tender. "No," he admitted. "I don't." After that, everything changed. Soren began arriving earlier each evening, sometimes before dinner, bringing food so they could eat together in her chambers. Sometimes in the afternoon, simply to sit by her fire and read, while she worked on embroidery she didn't need eyes to complete. They talked. Not about important things at first. Small things, books they had read, places they had seen. The mundane details of running a kingdom, the frustrations of dealing with advisors who thought they knew better. But slowly, carefully, the conversations deepened. "Why are you so cold?" Senna asked one night, pressed against his chest in the darkness. "Lycans run hot. Everyone knows that. But you feel like winter." Soren went rigid beside her. His scent shifted, the winter sharpness returning. "It's a family condition," he said flatly. Nothing more. The dismissal stung, but Senna didn't push. He was entitled to his secrets. She had enough of her own. Instead, she began taking care of him in small ways. Building up the fire when he arrived looking pale, having the servants bring warmer blankets to his chambers, making sure hot tea was always ready when he visited. He noticed. She could tell by the way his eyes tracked her movements, by the confusion that flickered across his face whenever she did something kind. "Why do you do this?" he asked one evening, watching her stoke the fire. "Do what?" "Care. About my comfort. About whether I'm cold." He shook his head slightly. "This is a contract, Senna. You don't have to pretend." She turned to face him, her heart aching at the genuine bewilderment in his voice. "It's not pretending, Your Majesty. It's simply what one does for someone they—" She stopped. The word she had almost spoken hung between them, dangerous and terrifying. Someone they, what? Care about? Worry about? Love? Someone they're married to. She finished lamely. Soren studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he rose from his chair, crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. The kiss was different from all the others. Not gentle, not careful. Desperate. Hungry. As if he was trying to communicate something he didn't have words for. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Soren pressed his forehead against hers. "I don't understand you," he murmured. "I don't understand any of this." "That makes two of us," Senna whispered back. That night, he didn't leave at all. He slept beside her until dawn, and when he woke, he kissed her shoulder, her neck, her jaw. "I have council meetings," he said reluctantly. "I should go." "You should," she agreed. Neither of them moved. "Tonight?" he said finally, pulling away. "I'll come back tonight." He did. And the night after that. And the night after that. The mate bond was forming. Senna could feel it, a thread connecting them that grew stronger with every touch, every conversation, every night spent tangled together in the darkness. She was falling in love with him. Not with the Lycan king. Not with the power or the palace or the crown. With him. With Soren. with his rare smiles and his unexpected kindness and the way he held her like she was something worth protecting. But beneath the growing warmth, fear still lurked. Because she still wore her cloak, still hid her face, still carried the mark on her shoulder that would destroy everything when he finally saw it. And Odessa's words echoed in her mind like a prophecy she couldn't escape. When he sees what you really are, he'll wish he'd chosen me instead. The truth was coming. Senna could feel it approaching like a storm on the horizon. She just had to hope their bond would be strong enough to survive it. 2 months had passed since the wedding, and Senna had never been happier. She woke each morning to find Soren beside her, his cold arms wrapped around her waist, his breath stirring her hair. She spent her days wandering the palace gardens, reading in the vast library, learning the rhythms of her new life as queen. And every evening, without fail, her husband came home to her, not because of duty, not because of contract, because he wanted to. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, in the way his hands found hers automatically, in the way he whispered her name in the darkness like a prayer he hadn't meant to speak aloud. The mate bond between them had grown into something powerful and undeniable. Senna felt it constantly now, a golden thread connecting her heart to his. When he was happy, she felt warmth spread through her chest. When he was troubled, she felt the echo of his worry like a shadow across her soul. He loved her. He hadn't said the words. Neither had she. But they both knew. It was there in every touch, every glance, and every moment they stole together between the demands of ruling a kingdom. "You're thinking again," Soren murmured one morning, pulling her closer. "I can feel it through the bond." "Good thoughts," Senna assured him. "Happy thoughts." He pressed a kiss to her shoulder and she shivered at the cold touch of his lips. "Tell me. I was thinking that I never expected this. Any of this." She turned in his arms, pressing her palm against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady beneath the ice of his skin. "I thought I would spend my life being unwanted, being invisible. And then you walked into that hall and chose me." "I chose wisely," he said quietly. "More wisely than I knew." Senna's heart swelled. She wanted to tell him everything, wanted to remove the veil, show him her face, explain the mark on her shoulder and trust that he would love her anyway, but fear still held her tongue. "Not yet," she told herself, "just a little longer, just until she was sure." "There's something I need to tell you," Soren said suddenly, his voice shifting. Senna tensed. "What is it?" "The council has been pressuring me about heirs." He pulled back slightly, and even in the darkness she could feel his gaze on her face. "They want to know when you'll be with child." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by something else, something that made her breath catch. "Actually," she said slowly, "there's something I need to tell you about that." Soren went very still. "What do you mean?" Senna took his hand and pressed it gently against her stomach. "The healers confirmed it yesterday," she whispered. "I'm pregnant." For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't breathe. Then his hand trembled against her belly, and his scent exploded around her. Joy and wonder and something close to fear all tangled together. "You're certain?" "Yes." "We're having a child." "Yes." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair, his whole body shaking. She had never felt him lose control like this, had never felt the walls around him crumble so completely. "Thank you," he murmured against her throat. "Thank you, Senna. Thank you." She held him as he trembled, as the cold of his body slowly warmed against hers, and she tried to ignore the fear that whispered beneath her joy. "He has what he needs now, an heir. Will he still want me?" But Soren didn't pull away. If anything, he became more devoted. He arrived earlier each evening, staying later each morning. He made plans for the nursery, discussed names, talked about what they would teach their son or daughter. For the first time in her life, Senna began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found a place where she belonged. Then the letter arrived. It came on a gray morning 3 weeks later, delivered by a messenger wearing the colors of her father's house. Soren was in council meetings, and Senna sat alone in her chambers when the servant brought it to her. She recognized her father's seal immediately. Her hands shook as she opened it. Her eyes scanned the words once, twice, 3 times, unable to process what she was reading. Your stepmother has fallen ill. She asks for you. She wishes to make amends before she dies. Please come. Severin Senna stared at the letter, her heart pounding. Her stepmother had never been kind to her, had never shown her anything but cruelty and contempt. Why would she want to make amends now? It had to be a trap. It had to be. But what if it wasn't? What if Vivian was truly dying and Senna refused to come, and she spent the rest of her life wondering what might have been said? She touched her stomach gently. She was going to be a mother. Perhaps it was time to let go of old wounds. Perhaps it was time to forgive. I'll go. See, she told the servant. Tell my husband I'll return before nightfall. It was the worst decision she had ever made. The Ashford estate looked exactly as Senna remembered it. Gray stone walls covered in dying ivy, windows like empty eyes staring down at her. The place where she had spent years being told she was nothing, worth nothing, deserving of nothing. She should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at her to flee. But she thought of the baby growing inside her, of the family she was building with Soren, of the possibility that maybe, finally, she could find closure with the people who had hurt her. So she walked inside. The entrance hall was dark, the curtains drawn against the afternoon light. Senna moved carefully, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. Stepmother, she called. Father? No answer. She climbed the stairs toward Vivienne's chambers, her unease growing with every step. Something was wrong. The house was too quiet, too still. She pushed open the door to the master bedroom and froze. Vivienne sat in a chair by the window, looking perfectly healthy. Not a trace of illness on her elegant face. Beside her stood Odessa, her arms crossed, her smile sharp as broken glass. And in the corner, watching with cold satisfaction, stood her father. Hello, little runt, Vivienne said pleasantly. Thank you for coming. Senna stumbled backward, but strong hands seized her from behind. Guards, at least 4 of them, pinning her arms, forcing her to her knees. What is this? Senna gasped. What are you doing? What we should have done years ago. Vivienne rose gracefully, crossing the room to stand before her. Destroying you properly. The king will never know. Vivienne's smile widened. You see, we've discovered something interesting about your precious husband. A secret that changes everything. She nodded to one of the guards, who stepped forward holding a sheaf of documents. The Valdres bloodline is cursed, Vivienne continued, has been for generations. Every king who truly loves his mate watches her die. The curse drains the life from whoever holds their heart. She laughed softly. Your husband chose you because he thought he would never love you. He thought hiding your face would protect him from caring. But he was wrong, wasn't he? He fell in love with you anyway. Senna's blood turned to ice. You're lying. Am I? Haven't you noticed how cold he is? How the winter lives inside him? Vivienne leaned closer. That cold is the curse, little runt. It grows stronger the more he loves. And when he finally marks you, when he completes the bond, the curse will drain your life entirely. You'll die. Your baby will die. And he'll be left with nothing but grief and ice. No. Senna shook her head desperately. No, that can't be true. Oh, but it is. Which brings us to why we brought you here. Vivienne straightened, her expression turning businesslike. We're going to expose you. Not just the pathetic truth that you're a runt hiding behind a veil. Something much worse. She nodded to Odessa, who stepped forward holding a small portrait. A portrait of a young man with pale eyes and dark hair. A man who looked almost exactly like Soren, but younger. Softer. Do you recognize him? Odessa asked sweetly. You should. He was your fated mate. Senna's world tilted. Prince Calum, Odessa continued, the king's younger brother. The man who took one look at you at your first claiming ceremony and rejected you publicly. The man who died 3 days later under mysterious circumstances. I didn't, Senna started. Of course you didn't. Vivian's voice was silk over steel. We know you didn't kill him, because we did. Silence crashed through the room. What? Senna whispered. Vivian smiled, cold and triumphant. Calum and I were lovers, had been for months. He was going to claim me, leave his position, and run away with me. But then his wolf recognized you as his fated mate, and suddenly everything changed. He was going to choose you, a pathetic, worthless runt. Her voice hardened with old fury. So I gave him a choice. Reject the runt publicly, humiliate her so thoroughly she'd never recover, and I would let him live. He agreed. He rejected you at the claiming ceremony, left that beautiful mark of shame on your shoulder. Senna felt tears streaming down her face. Then why did he die? Because he regretted it. Vivian's eyes glittered with malice. 3 days later, he came to me saying he'd made a mistake. That the bond was too strong. That he was going to go back to you and beg your forgiveness. She shrugged elegantly. So I poisoned him, made it look like a curse, made sure everyone believed the rejected little runt had killed her mate out of spite. Senna couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All these years, all the hatred, the shame, the belief that she was cursed, that she had somehow caused Calum's death, and it had been Vivian all along. Why are you telling me this? She managed. Because you're going to die here today, and I want you to know the truth first. Vivian gestured to the guards. We're going to kill you, hide your body, and tell the king you ran away. That you couldn't bear the shame of what you were hiding. He'll believe it. Everyone will believe it. And then Odessa will comfort him in his grief. And eventually, she'll take your place. No, Senna gasped. Please, I'm pregnant. Please don't. Vivian's hand cracked across her face. Did you think that would save you? Your death will break the curse's hold on him, you stupid girl. We're doing him a favor. She nodded to the guards. Take her to the cellar. Make it clean. The guards hauled Senna to her feet, and then the door exploded inward. Soren stood in the doorway, his eyes blazing with a fury so cold it burned. Behind him, royal guards poured into the room, swords drawn. Get away from my wife, the Lycan king said, his voice barely human. Vivian stumbled backward. How? The bond. Soren stalked forward, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Ice began forming on the windows, on the walls, spreading outward from him like a living thing. I felt her terror. I felt her pain. And I followed it straight to you. He reached Senna in 3 strides, pulling her behind him, positioning himself between her and the people who had tried to kill her. I heard everything, he said quietly. Every word, every confession. Vivian's face went white. Your Majesty, please, we can explain. You killed my brother. The words cracked through the air like breaking ice. You murdered Calum. You framed my wife. You tried to kill the mother of my child. He turned to his guards. Take them. All of them. They'll face judgment in my court. As the guards seized Vivian, Severin, and the struggling Odessa, Soren turned to Senna. His hands cupped her face gently, tilting her veiled head up toward his. Are you hurt? He demanded. No, I'm... Her voice broke. Soren, what she said about the curse, is it true? His expression shattered. Senna, is it true? Will loving you kill me? He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, they were filled with more pain than she had ever seen. Yes, he whispered. It's true. They returned to the palace in silence. Senna sat rigid in the carriage, her mind racing, her heart breaking. Everything made sense now. His coldness, his distance, his desperate insistence that he would never love her. He hadn't been cruel. He had been trying to protect her. How long have you known? She asked finally. Soren sat across from her, his head bowed, his hands clasped between his knees. He looked defeated in a way she had never seen before. Always, he said quietly. My mother died when I was 7. My father loved her too much, and the curse took her. I watched it happen. Watched the life drain out of her day by day until there was nothing left. His voice cracked. That's why I swore I would never love anyone, never mark anyone, never let the curse take another person I cared about. I chose you because you were hiding, because I thought if I couldn't see you, couldn't know you, I would never truly love you. But you do. Senna's voice was barely audible. Love me. More than I've ever loved anything. He looked up at her, and tears were streaming down his face. More than my own life. And that's why you need to leave me. Take our child. Run as far as you can. The bond isn't complete. I haven't marked you yet. If you go now, maybe. No. The word cut through his desperate planning. Senna, you don't understand. If I mark you, if I complete the bond, the curse will kill you. I won't let that happen. I can't. I said no. She moved across the carriage, dropping to her knees before him, taking his frozen hands in hers. I'm not leaving you. I'm not running. We're going to find another way. There is no other way. I've spent my entire life searching. The curse can't be broken. It can't be undone. The only way to protect you is to let you go. Senna reached up to touch his face, wiping away his tears with gentle fingers. Then don't mark me, she said simply. We'll stay bonded but incomplete. We'll raise our child together. We'll love each other for as long as we have. It's not enough. His voice broke completely. I want forever with you, Senna. I want to mark you, claim you, and make you mine in every way. And I can't. I'll never be able to. Then we'll find someone who can break the curse. No one can. Vivian knew about it. Senna's mind was racing now. She knew details about the curse, about how it worked. That means there must be records. History. If a curse was cast, it can be broken. We just have to find out how. Hope flickered in Soren's eyes, fragile and uncertain. You really believe that? I believe in us. She pressed her forehead against his. I spent my whole life believing I was cursed, believing I was worthless, unlovable, broken beyond repair. And then you chose me. You showed me that everything I believed was wrong. She pulled back to look at him. Now let me do the same for you. Let me show you that this curse doesn't have to define us. Let me help you fight it. For a long moment, Soren just stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. I don't deserve you, he whispered. You deserve everything, she whispered back. And I'm going to make sure you get it. The next weeks were a whirlwind of research and revelation. Senna threw herself into the palace archives, searching for any record of the curse that had plagued the Valdris bloodline. Soren joined her when he could, the two of them poring over ancient texts by candlelight, searching for answers that had eluded generations, and slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. The curse had been cast 300 years ago by a powerful witch whose daughter had been rejected by the king of that era. In her rage and grief, she had cursed his bloodline to never know true love, to watch anyone they loved wither and die. Fire magic, Senna murmured, reading from a crumbling text. The curse was cast with ice at its core, but it was bound with fire. The only way to break it? She stopped. What? Soren leaned closer. What does it say? The only way to break it is with fire that matches the curse's power. Fire born of equal pain, equal rejection, equal loss. They stared at each other. I don't know any fire witches, Soren said slowly. And even if I did, where would we find one who had experienced me? The word hung in the air. Soren frowned. What do you mean? Senna's hands were shaking. This was it. The moment she had been dreading. The moment she had to reveal everything. There's something I haven't told you, she said quietly. Something about what I'm hiding. She stood slowly, her heart pounding. Then, for the first time since their wedding night, she reached up and lowered her hood. Soren's eyes widened, not with disgust, not with horror, with wonder. You're beautiful, he breathed. Look closer. She turned, pulling aside the collar of her dress to reveal her shoulder. Look at what I really am. There, stark against her pale skin, was the mark. The mate mark that had scarred when Calum rejected her. And around it, barely visible, lines of faded silver that traced across her skin like frozen lightning. The rejection mark, Soren whispered. But those other marks? I didn't know what they were until now. Senna's voice trembled. But I think I understand. When Calum rejected me, something happened. Something changed inside me. I always thought it was shame, was brokenness, but it wasn't. She held out her hand, and flames erupted from her palm. Golden fire, warm and bright, dancing across her fingers without burning her. Soren stumbled backward. How? Fire born of pain, Senna said quietly. Fire born of rejection. Fire that matches the curse's power, because it was born from the same kind of wound. She looked at him, tears streaming down her face. I think I can break your curse, Soren. I think that's why fate brought us together. Two broken people, two curses, one chance to save each other. Soren stared at her, at the flames dancing in her hand, at the face he was seeing for the first time. Then he crossed the room and kissed her. Not gently, not carefully. With all the desperate, overwhelming love he had been holding back for so long. I love you, he said against her lips. I love you. I love you. And for the first time, Senna believed that maybe, just maybe, love would be enough. The ritual chamber beneath the palace had not been used in centuries. Dust covered every surface. Ancient symbols lined the walls, carved into stone by hands long since turned to bone. In the center of the room, a circle had been etched into the floor, runes spiraling outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. Senna stood at the circle's edge, her heart pounding and her hands steady. Soren stood across from her, pale and terrified, and so beautiful it made her chest ache. You don't have to do this, he said for the 100th time. We don't know what will happen. The text said the curse could only be broken by fire that matched its power, but they didn't say the person wielding that fire would survive. I know. Senna, please. I can't lose you. I won't watch you suffer for another 300 years. She stepped forward, taking his hands. I won't let our child grow up wondering if they'll inherit this curse. I won't let fear dictate our future. She pressed his palm against her belly, where their child was growing. This is our family, she said softly, and I will do whatever it takes to protect it. Soren's eyes filled with tears. If something goes wrong, then you'll raise our child with all the love you've been afraid to feel. She kissed him gently. But nothing is going to go wrong. I survived rejection. I survived shame. I survived years of being told I was nothing. I didn't come this far to fail now. She stepped back into the circle. The flames came easier now. She had been practicing for weeks, learning to control the fire that had always burned inside her. It rose from her palms, golden and bright, spreading outward to fill the ancient runes. The symbols began to glow. Senna. Soren's voice was tight with fear. I'm all right. But she could feel it now. The curse's power, ancient and cold and furious at being challenged. It pressed against her flames, fighting back, trying to extinguish the fire that threatened it. She pushed harder. The flames roared higher, filling the chamber with light and heat. She could feel the curse shattering, could feel the ice that had bound the Valdris bloodline for 3 centuries beginning to crack. But it wasn't enough. The curse was too strong, too deeply rooted. It needed more. It needed everything she had. Senna closed her eyes and thought of Soren, of the way he held her in the darkness, of the way he kissed her hand when words failed him, of the life growing inside her, the child they would raise together. And she let go. All the pain of her rejection, all the shame of her mark, all the years of being told she was worthless, unlovable, broken. She poured it all into the flames, transforming agony into power, suffering into strength. The fire exploded outward, and the curse screamed. She felt it break, felt the ancient magic shatter like ice beneath a spring sun. The cold that had plagued the Valdris bloodline for generations evaporated in an instant, consumed by flames that burned away 300 years of suffering. Then the fire died. Senna collapsed. She heard Soren screaming her name, felt his arms catch her before she hit the ground. Everything was dark and distant, and she was so tired, so impossibly tired. Stay with me. His voice cracked. Senna, please. Don't leave me. Don't. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. And then she felt something she had never felt before. His hands against her skin. Warm. Not cold. Warm for the first time since she had known him. The curse. She managed to whisper. It worked? Yes. He was crying, tears falling onto her face. Yes, it worked. The cold is gone. I can feel everything. But none of it matters if you don't. She reached up and pressed her finger to his lips. I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. I just need to rest. His laugh was half sob. You terrified me. I know. She smiled weakly. I terrified myself. He gathered her in his arms and carried her from the chamber, and for the first time since they had met, his body was warm against hers. 6 months later, Senna stood in the palace gardens, their daughter cradled in her arms. Mira had her father's dark hair and her mother's warm eyes. She was perfect in every way, a miracle born of love and sacrifice, and the stubborn refusal to accept that some curses couldn't be broken. She's beautiful, Soren said, appearing at her side. He wrapped his arms around them both, pressing a kiss to Senna's temple. She has your nose, Senna teased. Poor child. They laughed together, and the sound echoed through the garden like music. So much had changed in the months since the curse had broken. Vivian had been executed for the murder of Prince Calum. Severin had been stripped of his lands and titles, condemned to live out his days in exile. And Odessa had surprised everyone. She had testified against her mother, had revealed everything she knew about Vivian's schemes and cruelties. She had begged Senna's forgiveness with tears streaming down her face, and Senna, thinking of her own child, of the future she wanted to build, had granted it. Odessa now served as one of her ladies in waiting. They would never be close, perhaps, but they had found a fragile peace. I have something for you, Soren said quietly. Senna looked up at him. Oh? He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside lay a ring, delicate silver set with a stone that seemed to contain captured firelight. I had it made from the ashes of the curse, Mule, he explained, a reminder that even the darkest magic can be transformed into something beautiful. Senna's eyes filled with tears. Soren, I know we're already married. He slipped the ring onto her finger. But I wanted to give you something that represented who we are now. Not the broken people who found each other at an auction. Not the strangers who made a contract to survive. But us. The people we've become together. She kissed him, long and deep, their daughter cooing happily between them. I love you, she whispered against his lips. I love you more. Impossible. He grinned, and the expression transformed his face. He smiled so freely now, laughed so easily. The cold had left him entirely, replaced by a warmth that seemed to radiate from his very soul. You know what I've been thinking? He said. What? Mira needs a sibling. Senna laughed, swatting his shoulder. She's barely 6 months old. I'm just planning ahead. His eyes sparkled with mischief. Besides, I have a lot of lost time to make up for. Years of not feeling, not loving, not living. I intend to spend the rest of my life making up for every single day. Senna leaned into him, their daughter nestled between their hearts. She thought of the auction where they had met, of the runt who had refused to be chosen and the king who had chosen her anyway, of curses and secrets and the impossible, terrifying, beautiful journey that had brought them here. I was so afraid, she admitted quietly. When you found me at that auction, I thought you were making a mistake. I thought you would regret it the moment you learned what I was. And what are you? Soren asked softly. A runt, a rejected mate, a woman with too many scars and too much shame. He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his eyes. You want to know what I see when I look at you? He said. I see the woman who stood in a room full of wolves and refused to be claimed. I see the queen who accepted a loveless marriage with grace and dignity. I see the wife who loved me despite every wall I built. I see the mother of my children, the breaker of my curse, the warmth that finally melted the ice around my heart. His voice dropped to a whisper. I see everything, Senna, and I love all of it. She buried her face in his chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. Happy tears. Finally, blessedly happy. The runt they had ignored had chosen no one, but the Lycan king had chosen her. And in choosing each other, they had found something neither of them had ever dared to hope for. A love that could break any curse, a bond that nothing could sever, a forever that was finally, beautifully, theirs. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it and would like to support the channel, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting me know your thoughts. I read every single one, and they mean more than you know.